Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to this session. I'm Mark Willems. I work at the University of Chichester in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure you have all heard about the University of Chichester, where that is. So in case you don't, we are in the south of England. It's a very small university with about 7,000 students, and 20% of those 7,000 are taking a sport-related course. It's a very pleasant area to be in. I set myself this task today in this session, and I may be challenged on that by you in the audience, but I will do it anyway. Blackcurrant has shown the potential for anthocyanin-rich supplementation to enrich the world of sport and exercise nutritional ergogenic aids. That's quite something, isn't it? Quite bold to make that statement. So I need to provide you with information to justify that take-home message. So I'm going to set the scene, a bit of background information again, and then I can only share some effects of anthocyanin-rich New Zealand Blackcurrant with a focus on exercise performance. What can it do? And then there's also a lot of unknowns in this area, and actually I feel that we're still scratching the surface with the potential that anthocyanin-rich supplementation has. So if you type in, and when I started to work in this area in 2012, I have to be honest, I struggled with the pronunciation of the word. I didn't even know what it was, so I was on a very steep learning curve for a few years, and I still think that learning curve has not finished yet. But if you type in the word anthocyanins in Google, you get these colorful pictures, you get chemical structures with polyphenol rings, with phenol rings, and you also have the word antioxidant, which Jenny mentioned already. Now here is an attention grabber for you. And especially for those above the age of 35, pay attention. Who has not heard about old person smell or old people smell? Have not heard about that. A few hands go up. That's good enough. That is related to oxidative stress. Why is that? Because throughout the lifespan, we change our body odor. And when you turn 35 or so, male or female, there's no escape for that, you start to produce a compound, a volatile organic compound, which is called 2-nonenal. It's a lipid peroxidation product by the sebaceous glands, and it's an indication of a decrease in antioxidant defense. So I was involved. I'm an exercise physiologist, but I'm open for nice opportunities. Can we reduce 2-nonenal? And if we can, that's an indication that the powder that we were using is reducing oxidative stress. So this was a study that we did a few years ago together with Professor Sekine at Tokai University in Japan, who's an expert on human body odor. From a young age to an old age. So for this study, we gave individuals, and these individuals were all my smelly old colleagues, which I approached for this study. We gave them 6 grams of New Zealand blackcurrant powder for 7 days. We had no restrictions on their diet and so on. And we got gas samples shipped over from Japan, which those participants wore in the back of the neck, and that would sample the skin gases. And we admit about 400 of those. It's amazing. Samples were shipped back, and we were able to reduce 2-nonenal by 28%. Some anecdotal information is that those colleagues who I consider a bit smelly had large changes in this compound. But anyway, lower 2-nonenal indicates an antioxidant effect by New Zealand blackcurrant powder. So it can work as an exogenous antioxidant. What was also available in the literature in a study from 2005 is that there is an acute effect on blood flow by the intake of a certain amount of anthocyanin concentrate. So in this particular study, they gave individuals blackcurrant, and they measured with near-infrared spectroscopy the change in blood flow. And blackcurrant increased blood flow by 22%. That may not mean a lot, but there is still an increase in blood flow, and that could potentially be due also to an antioxidant effect. I'll go over this very quickly. I just want to hammer home again, we're talking here about delphinidins and cyanidins, and I will come back to that later in the talk. So blackcurrant, well, each berry has a unique anthocyanin composition. So blackcurrant is an exogenous antioxidant, may have benefits for exercise because oxidative stress is what happens during exercise, and it's rich in the flavonoid anthocyanins. Okay, let me move on to some effects of anthocyanin-rich New Zealand blackcurrant. Where do you start, where you have the opportunity to work in this area? So we started with whether you can measure any physiological responses. So what we did in a study with triathletes, again, a 7-day intake study. This was based on sort of unpublished information from the industry, is that you dose them for 7 days, and what we did was we measured just some physiological responses. And what we found when you did an intermittent cycling, incremental cycling test, we found lower lactates. Well, lower lactates gets people very excited because of, it's associated with fatigue. It's associated with other events. So New Zealand blackcurrant resulted in a shift of the cycling intensity lactate curve. That is also something you would see in individuals who have done a moderate intensity continuous training program, an endurance training program. We got this just with 7 days of 6 grams intake of that powder. I mean, we got super excited about this. In addition to this, when you have that shift, you also produce more power at particular lactate values. So that may have a potential application as well for performance. What we also did in the same study, we did a VO2 max test, and although we didn't find a significance for maximum oxygen uptake, we did see a lower lactate at exhaustion. And 77% of the triathletes had the decrease. So keep in mind, not everyone responds in the same way, and that may be due maybe to the dosing that we used and so on. I will come back to that a few times. So that's quite exciting. We have a shift in the lactate curve that would allow you to produce more power at certain constant lactate values, and then we have a decreased lactate following a maximum oxygen uptake test. So I was super excited. Some colleagues may say to me, what does it do for performance? That really matters. So then we moved on from using powder with extract, and we asked the business, we basically said, it's very difficult to do these performance studies with powder because of the blinding that you are require. So it would be really cool if we could have a product that you can give in capsules and that you can do placebo-controlled double-blind studies. So the first one that we did was a time trial over 16.1 kilometers, and in 14 individuals we saw a decrease of 2.4%. So that seemed to work. I also want to point out that we did 2 full familiarizations which is quite important, I think, for performance studies, that you don't get any learning effects still in when you examine the effects of a supplement in this case. Now, why is 2.4% of interest, or why is that important? Is that I assume most of you in the audience are familiar with beetroot. A beetroot study is out there that had a 2.7% enhanced performance. So there is some similarity there in that aspect. If you then look at the individual responses, and keep in mind, these people were only tested once on placebo, once on the supplement after 2 full familiarizations. But if you look at the individual responses, people enhanced performance up to 8.7%. I have to say, I was quite skeptical about some of this, because it's sometimes a bit too good to be true, but that's what we have. What we heard a lot from reviewers, and it was challenging to get the work published in the beginning, is, the 7-day dosing. Was this an effect of the final intake? So we followed that up. This was actually during COVID by one of my PhD students, Stefano Montanari. What he did was trying to get a big sample out in the community. This was a home-based study where we, again, had a double-blind placebo-controlled crossover design, but the individuals in the study did not know that. We did say to them, we're testing 2 products, and we want to know which one is the best. Because we had no opportunities to communicate with these people in person, and we decided to have this approach. He was able to recruit 34 individuals, 8 females only. We heard it this morning from Louise Burke. More studies are required in women, and I strongly support that. And what came out of this study, and this was an acute dose of 350 milligrams of blackcurrant anthocyanins, that those sort of with a time below 1400 seconds did not respond. And those, the slower cyclists, did respond. So potentially, that the ones that did not respond may need either a higher dose or need to have that 7 days dosing that I showed you before. Frankly, we are still scratching the surface again with what is the dosing strategy required for performance enhancement. But I think I'm confident that with certain endurance exercise models, we can have an effect. But what about exercise models that have anaerobic components to it, more high intensity intermittent exercise? And I share a few examples with you. First, we did a study with the Loughborough intermittent shuttle test. This was a study where we dosed for 1 per day for 7 days. And I apologize if I go from 1 capsule suddenly to 2 capsules and then 3 capsules, because I don't present these studies in a chronological order. But it sort of fits the story of what I want to tell, whether it has application for aerobic exercise or anaerobic exercise. So in this particular study, double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover design again, familiarization. For those who are not, let me go back. For those that are not familiar with the Loughborough intermittent shuttle test, and I'm not sharing all the data with you, it consists of several blocks of 15 minutes, where you walk, where you sprint, where you run at particular intensities of your VO2 max, which was determined with a shuttle test. And what I need to point out here is that in each block, there was a fasted sprint. And so what I'm going to show you in the next slide is the effect of blackcurrant on the slowing of that fasted sprint. So in block 1, they did, depending on their speed during 55% and 95%, they did about 9 or 10 sprints. One of them was the fastest, and each block had a fastest sprint. But obviously, there is fatigue development in this test, so how would blackcurrant affect that fatigue development? So what was the change for the fastest sprint time in block 1? This is what we found. Block 2, no significant effect. Block 3, no significant effect. And it sort of turned out at the end of the test that there was an ability to maintain faster sprint times. So New Zealand Blackcurrant reduced the slowing of the fastest sprint, and this has implications for team sports with intermittent sprinting. That was a field protocol. Let me move on to a laboratory protocol that we did. The dosing here was again one capsule for 7 days. And just to get the details of this test to you, it consists of blocks with 19 seconds of running and 15 seconds of active recovery. And as you can see, the running started at about 80% of the estimated intensity at maximum oxygen uptake. And then you move through that protocol as a participant to the point that you are exhausted. So this is not a protocol that you complete all the way to the end. At one point, you have to stop. So what did we find with this particular study? We had an 11% increase in, I've called it their sprint distance. It would be better to say high intensity running distance. But if you look at the placebo conditions, they ran for about 2,600 meters, and they added another 11% to that as a cohort observation. Again, not everyone improved, and I will come back to that a little bit later. Now, this was done by a master student, this project, with close supervision by me, but still, 11% is quite a lot. And I sat on this a little while. Shall I publish this or not? Because, 11% is a bit high. But I decided, we have these observations with aerobic performance. I'll get this into the public domain. But in the back of my mind, I thought, we need to repeat this to see whether we can replicate this. So what is the repeatability of that? As a follow-up of this, and this study was published only recently, but it was completed before COVID, but it took a while to get written up. What we did in this particular study is, and it's the same exercise protocol that we used with the 11% increase of the cohort. We tested every individual twice in the placebo condition and twice in the blackcurrant condition. We used 2 capsules here for 7 days, and it included washout periods and so on. So, each individual is a good 6 to 8 weeks, well, a bit longer, 8 to 10 weeks in this study. And we had individuals who were involved in exercise, in sports or exercise with high intensity intermittent running. And I think in general, this is very important for sports nutrition, to do studies where you test people a few times with a supplement. And this is the only one we did so far because they're quite time consuming to do. So what did we find? And I've highlighted with the circles the repeat responders. And this was all randomized, not with blocks like placebo, blackcurrant, and then to another block where you could have blackcurrant placebo. And people have questioned whether that is the right approach. But we decided to do it completely randomized. And we had, of the 16 participants, we had 8 repeat responders. And we call those repeat responders because the smallest worthwhile change, because they had a change larger than the smallest worthwhile change. So for those 8 repeat responders, and keep in mind with the study that I presented you before, where there was an 11% increase, for the repeat responders, the average was 16% increase with this particular testing model. And that's quite high. Is 50%, is that disappointing? I don't know. Maybe, again, higher doses are required, maybe dosing over a longer period to get more people responding repeatedly to the supplement. Okay, this is not a mistake. You have seen this slide before. And the reason I bring it up is that if you have a shift of the intensity lactate curve, potentially that can have effects for substrate utilization. And the next speaker, Sam Shepard, is going to cover that in much more detail with observations in group studies. But what we did also in the last few years is some case studies with individuals, whether they can change their substrate utilization. And these are not elite athletes. These are recreationally, well, not recreationally active individuals, because if you can run a 100-miler, a few of those per year, you're a bit more than recreationally active. But in this particular study, I'm quite excited about that, is that we had an opportunity to test these individuals in between 200-mile runs. And obviously, that individual was highly trained to do these distances. And in between those 200-mile runs, we had not, the best design, because we couldn't do a placebo control study because of the washout period. So we had a condition where the person didn't take anything, and then we had the person dosed with 2 capsules for 7 days. But we did not do any performance measurements, because potentially that can have bias if you know that you are in a condition that you're not taking anything. So was there a response to New Zealand Blackcurrant? And this person was tested in the lab with our gold standard Douglas bag technique, which I really enjoy using. The individual was in the lab, ran for 2 hours, a half marathon, and we also allowed the individual to take his energy gels, what he would normally do when he would go out for a 2-hour run. So what did we observe? We had an increase in fat oxidation of 23%. And you may look at this now and think, whoa, that's high. Well, if you think that's high, Sam has additional information that it's not unusual to find those values. And carbohydrate oxidation was down by 11%. So even highly trained individuals, especially endurance trained individuals who have probably well adapted by training their fat metabolism, there is still an opportunity for the anthocyanins, well, likely the anthocyanin-induced metabolites, to affect substrate utilization. Now, endurance athletes also are known when they exercise and do in hot environments, and as I mentioned, I share with you some effects, that as a result of exercise in hot environments, and we have examples of the Olympic Games and one coming up in a hot environment, the heat stress can lead to heat storage, GI symptoms, GI problems, and intestinal epithelial permeability. So we did some work on that as well. We don't see it as a wonder drug, but we sort of explore where there is application for this. And when the blackcurrant can enhance blood flow, obviously, exercise in the heat can be affected by how blood flow may be changed. So the protocol that we used was 60 minutes of running at a moderate intensity exercise, and they were tested in 34 degrees Celsius. These are not heat acclimatized individuals, and in this study only males, and we did not see an effect on heat storage by New Zealand blackcurrant. There's a similar increase in core temperature during the exercise. But what about intestinal epithelial permeability? We measured intestinal fatty acid binding protein, and if you measure that in your blood plasma, that means it has moved out from the intestinal cells into the plasma, indicating damage to those cells. And what we observed was a decrease in the cohort by about 40%, and that is very, very, very interesting that happens. So this is the group data for the intestinal fatty acid binding protein. If I show you the individual data with the performance studies, we had some people not responding. If you look at the 80-minute point here, so this was 20 minutes after the exercise, New Zealand blackcurrant extract reduced in all individuals the intestinal fatty acid binding protein, indicating less damage to the intestinal cells. This parameter has been linked with gastrointestinal symptoms, and I'm going to share those with you, but I would like to say that the protocol that we did was just 1 hour, and recommendation is to do it for a longer period. I'm aware of a study actually here in the United States that is looking at that now with a better methodology. These were just pilot observations. But what we found was in the placebo conditions, 11 individuals had a score on GI symptoms, and that was reduced to only 4 individuals in the blackcurrant condition. I also have to say that there were only 2 of those individuals who had severe symptoms, and they still were scoring severe symptoms with the blackcurrant. But a lot of those with very mild symptoms, they disappeared with the blackcurrant. And this was a placebo-controlled, crossover, randomized study. So this is a bit bold, but I will do it anyway. Anthocyanin-rich blackcurrant extract reduces gastrointestinal distress and intestinal damage during exercise in the heat. But it is a bit bold because, we're looking forward to the Arizona study where it's being done to see whether they can back this up. But I'm confident. Okay, a little bit about the unknowns, and there are actually quite a lot. So blackcurrant contains delphinidins and cyanidins. So this is a very interesting study done by a group at University of Reading, I think. I may be wrong on that, but anyway, what they did was they labeled cyanidin 3-glucoside, which is one of the main anthocyanins in our diet anyway, but also about 35% or so of blackcurrant contains cyanidin 3-glucoside. And what they did is they had it labeled and they gave it to individuals, and over a 48-hour period, they follow the recovery of that. And this is where it becomes all a bit complicated, and I'm quite sure there's people in the audience who know way more about this than I do. You get quite a number of metabolites in the blood. What is interesting is that when they measured the labeled carbon in urine, in feces, in breath, and in blood, that the recovery rate had a range of 15 to 85%. What that means is, for that individual who had a recovery rate of 15%, that in the 2-day period, there's 85% that you can't detect. What is that? Where is it? And then there's individuals who had these high recovery rates where you can, you're missing 15% of what was going in after 2 days. And a lot of work needs to be done on this, on why that is, and whether that potentially has an effect on why people respond and why people do not respond. Now, the situation is more complicated with intake of an anthocyanin-rich supplement, because what I showed you in this slide is just one acute dose. In the case of blackcurrant, when you do chronic dosing over a number of days, and some of those metabolites, they peak after a few hours, some of the metabolites peak after 24 hours. If you do repeated dosing, you get maybe a build-up of these metabolites over time. And obviously, the gut microbiota has a role to play in that. And we have no clue what these level of metabolites are. So if you're interested in measuring this, then talk to us. We're very interested in seeing what happens, whether you get this buildup of particular metabolites. But potentially, I feel this is the answer where you may have responders and non-responders. So a lot of work needs to be done in this area. Now, why was there so much attention for blackcurrant? Jenny showed you this slide. I showed you here again. 53 hits when you type in particular berries as title words in PubMed. My students get sick and tired of me getting to PubMed and showing them what's available in the literature. But in this case, it's clearly leading the field. We have done about 40 experimental studies on this since 2015, so we contribute a lot to the 53 that you see on there. Not everything turns gold in our hands. We also have studies in which it didn't work, but we've contributed a lot to the body of knowledge in this area. So for now, we can say New Zealand Blackcurrant are really champions. Champions for now, because I think due to the lack of research on other berries and other anthocyanin-rich supplements. And I welcome competition. I really welcome that. Maybe I challenge you to compete with us to see what happens, which one is the best. We will see. But that will take some time. So some future directions, still quite a journey. Join the ride if you're interested. The anthocyanin composition, does it matter in humans? We know there's animal studies out there where different anthocyanins have different physiological effects. Scratching the surface, what are the optimal dosing strategies? We have not dosed for longer than 2 weeks. Should we do that? I think I would be in favor of that to see what happens. Would we need to dose with higher dosages? Yes, I'm in favor of that. I have a science agenda. The business has a business agenda. Sometimes we match, sometimes we don't, but that's how it is. But we're scratching the surface on this with what is the optimal dosing strategy. And then, if you take this supplement, how does it interfere with your normal habitual diets? Is it then still effective? And there are some indications that it could be effective because the endurance athlete, he was using gels and it didn't blunt the substrate utilization. It didn't blunt the fat oxidation, although he was taking carbohydrates in that 2-hour run. Okay, finally, we just published a paper, a narrative review in Current Developments in Nutrition, where you can, I don't cover all the 40 experimental studies, but a lot of them in that paper. Hopefully, here's the take-home message again, blackcurrant has shown the potential for anthocyanin-rich supplementation to enrich the world of sport and exercise nutritional ergogenic aids. Acknowledgements, thanks to New Zealand Blackcurrant and to Sojourn Berry Fruits and CurraNZ, who allow me to go to various places around the world to talk about this. I'm always super excited about this, and they're very generous with providing me with supplements. And what sometimes happens is they send a bit too much supplements, so I get them for free to take them myself. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hand over now to Sam Shepard. Thank you.